So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this second seminar on organized by the I-LanD Research Center, the I-LanD Seminar Series. Our second seminar will be on hate speech. So we have the second session on hate speech. This session will have Stefania Maci as a lead host in conversation with Mariavita Cambria, Natalia Knobloch, Angela Pitassi, and Maria Grazia Sindoni. And I thank everybody for participating, for accepting our invitation in this seminar. I will very briefly introduce our lead host, Stefania Maci, and then I will leave the floor to her for to start the seminar. Stefania Maci is full professor of English language and translation at the Department of Foreign Languages, Literatures and Cultures of the University of Bergamo. And she's also the director of CERLIS, the Research Center on Specialized Languages. She's currently involved in national and international research projects on academic English and ESP, with a particular focus on medical and tourist discourses with a corpus linguistics approach. Stefania, Professor Stefania Maci, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Emilia. Call me Stefania, don't worry. And I do hope to be as a good host as Giuseppe was in the last session, because I attended that and it was extremely interesting. So today we have here, as Emilia has just said, Mariavita Cambria. I'm trying to follow the alphabetic order so that nobody, well, I won't give any preference to anybody. So Mariavita Cambria, I missed somebody, Maria Cristina Nisco, whom I can't see. Anyway, I'm sure she's here. And then Angela Pitassi and Maria Grazia Sindoni. If you don't mind, I would present each of our guests briefly, very briefly, and then we can open the discussion. Sorry,
Stefania, excuse me.
Yeah.
Maria Cristina Nisco is not here.
Okay.
We have Natalia Knobloch as
I'm very sorry for that. Yeah, okay. Natalia, I can't see Natalia. I'm sorry, I don't have an introduction for Natalia. I'm very sorry for that. Maybe Natalia can introduce herself. Okay, so Mariavita Cambria is Associate Professor of English Language and Linguistics at the University of Messina. Her research interests include critical discourse analysis, multimodality, Irish studies, genre analysis, corpus linguistics, and contemporary variety of English, in particular Irish English. And she has published extensively on discourse analysis, multimodality, online newspaper, corpus linguistic, and Irish English. She is on the editorial board of the international journals Imago, and she has published 3 books, Irish English, Language, History and Society, Drammaturgia della Memoria in Brian Friel e Marina Carr, Militanti, Madri Mogli, Movimento delle Donne in Irlanda, and she has co-edited Web Genres and Web Tools, and I'm representing the Great War, New Approaches to the Centenary. I'm switching to Angela Pitassi. Angela Pitassi is a third-year PhD student at the University of Connecticut in Applied Linguistics and Discourse Studies. Her research interests include small Spanish language media outlets in the US, including radio discourse and local newspapers. She is currently working on her dissertation regarding the construction of the ideal immigrant in local Spanish language newspapers on the US-Mexico border during the last US presidential election. Maria Grazia Sindoni is professor of English linguistics and translation at the University of Messina, and her main research focus include video-mediated interaction and digital communication, analyzed within the theoretical framework of multimodal and social semiotic studies. She's currently working on how to combine multimodality and artificial intelligence models. And she is author of over 100 publications and is a regular contributor to the Routledge Studies in Multimodality book series. I'm afraid I don't have an introduction for Natalia. Natalia, I'm very sorry for that. I wasn't aware you were here. So if you would like to say a couple of things about yourself, your research, and
Sure.
Thank you. Sorry for that.
Yeah, it was my fault. I did not send it on time. There have been several quite stressful days around here.
Yeah.
So I am an associate professor at Saginaw Valley State University in Michigan, USA. I am currently co-editor of the Journal of Language and Discrimination. I study political and cognitive linguistics, sociolinguistics, I do corpus-assisted discourse analysis. I have studied xenophobia and hostility online communication and cognitive processes in verbal aggression and propaganda. I have published in such journals as Journal of Language, Aggression and Conflict, Pragmatics and Cognition, Discourse and Society, and I have edited the collected volume Language of Conflict, Discourses of the Ukrainian Crisis, which came out in 2020. And we're currently in copy editing for the volume Grammar of Hate, Morphosyntactic Features of Hateful, Aggressive, and Dehumanizing Discourse, which should come out this summer. Okay. So that's kind of the highlights. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think we are looking forward to all your new publication and as well as the old one. People are already aware of that. Today, as Emilia said, is the second session of hate speech and linguistic research. So I'm asking each guest to present in 10 minutes their own topic, in particular in relation to hate speech. In particular, I would ask each of them the same question to start the discussion. So the question is, in what way, if any, can your approach and your disciplinary studies, your research, answer and contrast the various ways in which hate speech is expressed, or even in the case of fake news, how can your research help people to contrast the dissemination of fake news and the spreading of hate speech? And in your opinion, which is the best methodological approach to do that? So we may follow again the alphabetic order. So Mariavita Cambria first, and then Natalia, then Angela Pitassi, and at last but not least, Maria Grazia Sindoni.
Okay.
Sorry, am I supposed to keep the time the people? No, more or less 10 minutes. Okay.
Yeah, more or less 10 minutes is fine.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, Mariavita, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks a million, Stefania. I'm very pleased and happy to be here today, and thanks to I-LanD for this seminar. And also thanks for the question. I mean, which are very complex and kind of very broad. I'm trying to answer a couple of questions. Some of the issue that you raised, Stefania, and probably the first one that I'm going to address is by just presenting what was my, the kind of my research question in dealing with hate speech. And the first kind of question for me was what, as a linguist, as a multimodal critical discourse analysis, that is my approach. So I think that, in this 10 minutes, my point would be how can we use the multimodal critical discourse analyst tools in order to understand a bit better this kind of context and this kind of new areas of work. So, and how how can we approach and counter hate speech? And when I asked this very first question, this very reserved question, of course, this was linked to another one. That is to say, who gets to decide what hate speech is? So how can we define it? And what is like the public, and I dealt specifically with online communities, what can be like the public reaction to this? So in order to address those things, I started from kind of analyzing a sort of institutional response to hate speech. So what I did basically was to have a look at some documents, and specifically some institutional documents. I specifically look at the Irish context, and it was a report legislating on anti-hate speech. And what was the reaction that the public, like the general public, had when this report was published? And these two kind of texts, which were, you know, I made for the first one was sort of a huge report, and while the second were answers and comments that were left on news sites to the publication of this report, just gave me an idea about how hate speech, on the one hand, is like a global phenomenon, and which is extremely true, but at the same time, it works also on a sort of very small local scale with small communities. And by approaching this text that was the text produced in Ireland and presented in December 2020 by the Irish Minister of Justice, this gave me also the possibility, the opportunity to have a look at also at some specific local issue. And on the one hand, it is true then in the recent years, there's been an increasing response to hate speech crimes. And this has generated several hate speech campaigns, public initiatives, and the Council of Europe portal includes a section of hate speech, addressing and identifying also the major causes. And many countries have been working on how to legislate this. And there is in this a sort of difference between US and Europe, in that in the US, possibly the doctrine concerning technology companies, platform, digital startups is a bit more, let's say, liberal in that, while in Europe there are more concerns about the so-called freedom of speech. And this is like the first thing that comes to mind when analyzing hate speech. So in looking at this consultation document, one of the first things that emerge concerning how can hate speech can be countered was the fact that this document was the result of several online meetings, public meetings, question and discussion papers, and also online surveys. So about 3,500 questionnaires that were put online and answered. And by analyzing this linguistically and also multimodally, one of the first things that emerged is the very first question, the second question that I asked, that is to say, who gets to decide what hate speech is? Because one of the issues that was addressed in the questionnaire and that was answered by many people in the public was why are we taking for granted that there is a category such hate speech that exists? In addressing this as a government, as the state, as a public institution, such as the Minister for Justice did in 2020 in I-LanD, we are taking for granted that this topic exists. So this was one of the elements that emerged in the answer to the questionnaire. And in the report, there are several a sort of different, how can I say, answers and areas of investigation, and also some kind of suggestions that are made in order to contrast hate speech. But one of this, and I'm just focusing on this because it's probably the area of my main concern, is the area of what you addressed before, like online site, fake news. How is this, in a way, can be this legislated in online platform? Specifically, what can be the responsibilities of online digital platforms? So, in order to do this and to also understand, because there was one of the questionnaires would be like, what can be done in terms of blocking the incitement of hatred online. And one of my question again was, is this how is the public aware of this problem, and how can this be used as a form of creating some sort of the responses that start from audience, start from the communities? And in order to check this, I had a look at a very small corpus of comments that were posted on a very famous, but at the same time pretty controversial Irish news site, that is the irishbullshit.ie. And in this there is, as it happens very often in online digital environments, the creation of a community of readers that answer questions and their response to main news. And by analyzing the comments to the publication of this report, one of the things that came up to very clearly was that most of the people belonging to the community did not recognize the need of an anti-hate speech legislation as such. And this was most of the time taken as a sort of a non-issue, something that somehow would have blocked freedom of speech. And all these problems about the responsibilities of the platform, the main areas to the anti-speech legislation, were pushed under the kind of big umbrella phenomenon that was the freedom of speech. Now, this is also related to a couple of cultural issue, let's say, related to the Irish context and Ireland somehow, where you have a huge influence of the USA on the one hand, but at the same time, and this was also done during the post-Brexit kind of campaign, and in this there were also some issue related to how Ireland, for instance, was dealing with all the legislation regarding gender, regarding race, and regarding also a community that is very specific of Ireland, that is the one of the travelers. So in this corpus, a couple of main areas of interest emerge. On the one hand, the fact that anti-hate speech campaign were not recognized as a problem, and the fact that somehow the government was in a way guiding a sort of policy making by justifying it via the report. At the same time, there were also some local issues such as travelers community, the gender campaign, that were addressed as something that was typical of the Irish area, of the Irish community. So there was this kind of balance between localizing and de-localizing anti-speech campaigns that I found in that particularly useful. In terms of the methodology, in terms of the how can I say, English linguistics in general, multimodality can help this. I think that an analysis of the different semiotic resources, especially in this type of environments, may help to understand how textuality may combine the different semiotic resources in order to address issues such as this. I think came out also during our last seminar, for instance, sarcasm and irony, right? So, for instance, in the answers, in the comments to the articles, many things were counteracted by the presence of emoticons, and the use of irony was balanced or not balanced by being serious or not being serious by this. So I think that on top of carrying out most of the time a sort of lexical analysis of the main areas of concern of anti-hate speech, multimodality and multimodal critical discourse analysis may help also in understanding how the visual, the words may help in constructing, deconstructing this thread, because this is also another thing that is pretty common in this kind of online communities, such as I call it article con comments genre. There are basically newspaper articles that allows the possibility for readers to comment. And this genre has evolved a lot through the years, has also expanded in many social media. And in this, you can easily notice also some threads. And in this, the use of the visual, the images, sometimes counterbalance the issue. So I think I'm done with my 10 minutes, and this is like my contribution to the anti-hate speech and hate speech in general. I mean, this kind of looking at 3 different areas, basically.
Thank you very much, Mariavita, for well, you gave me some insightful, and I will come to you back later on. Natalia, your turn now.
Thank you so much. I would like to continue the idea that I especially liked in Mariavita's talk, that, first of all, hate speech is complex. Well, I guess I would like to piggyback on several of those points. First of all, hate speech is complex. Second of all, what is it? And third, how can we identify it? It is a very difficult phenomenon, and I can share my opinion about it, and almost my personal frustration about some of the trends that I see in hate speech research. Let me correct myself. Sorry, that's probably not correct. It's more about the simplifying of the issue. Right, so there is a trend, I'm not sure about your cultures, but in the United States culture, there is a trend seeing words as something magic, right? Words are magic and words are very important, but every now and then there is another campaign. There's another campaign saying, don't use this word, use that word. Don't call this group this, call this group that. I agree with being kind, right, and being considerate, and definitely respecting a social group's desire for being called one thing and rejection of another label that some group might give them. So this is definitely reasonable and can be respected. What is a little frustrating is that there is an expectation. So if we ban a particular word, then this social problem is going to magically disappear. If we don't call this group this, then they're not going to be discriminated again. And it almost feels like, well, we're just putting band-aids here when there is a serious disease, serious social disease. Instead of treating our dying patient, we're just putting a band-aid there, and then we feel so good that, yeah, we're good people. We don't call this group this. They're starving, but we didn't call them something bad. I'm exaggerating, of course. However, well, I'm just trying to do that because I want to make my point that some people see the the campaign behind renaming things as if addressing the real social problems, the problem of hate, the problem of discrimination, the problem of bias and prejudice, which are plaguing our society. And so one of the things that I have been studying is the different ways that people choose to express their hateful attitudes. And of course, lexical ways to do that are the most noticeable. From what I read, I'm not a specialist in natural language processing and automatic hate speech identification, but from what I have read extensively in those fields, identifying hate speech automatically is still extremely difficult, and it is not very successful. So even the researchers who say, we have achieved a very impressive 7% increase over the best previous system that was automatically identifying online hateful comments. If you look at the results of that study more carefully and break up, because the overall number comes from identifying openly hateful comments, identifying correctly neutral comments, non-hateful, and identifying implicitly hateful comments. The same study that is one of the best at this time would have something like 25% success in identifying implicit hate. So we can label slurs or so-called fighting words. In the United States legislature, hate speech or aggressive discourse can be problematic only, unfortunately, if it includes the so-called fighting words. So when somebody explicitly says we should go and kill such and such person or such and such group of people, then it's considered hate speech. However, if the same awful message is expressed without the word kill, then no, it's not hate speech. We don't care, or we can't prove anything, at least. So I would like to highlight the issue that we need, if we want to reduce hate speech in the world, we should address the core issue, the core problem. We should address the problem of hate, and I think that is the real reason behind hate speech. So just banning particular words is not going to take care of the problem. So I'll just switch to some of the studies that I have done and some of the research that has been published in collected volumes that I edited. And after more lexical approaches to analyzing hateful discourse, I'm starting to shift slightly toward grammatical features. And as any linguist in this group would say, oh, this is insane, right? What are you saying? Do you believe that there's grammar of hate? I don't. Even though the title of the newest volume has the expression grammar of hate, and then subtitle morphosyntactic features of hateful and aggressive and dehumanizing discourse, I do not believe that there is a specific grammar that's reserved for hate speech. What I think is going on there is that awful people use the wealth of resources that language allows them to use, and they express their hateful, aggressive, dehumanizing attitudes by using those resources. I would compare words and grammatical structures to tools, right? You can take a knife and you can cook a wonderful dinner and feed a family. Or you can take the knife and kill a person. You can take a brick and build a house. Or you can take a brick and throw it at somebody, right? So we shouldn't blame the tool. If we see, let's say in this upcoming volume, if we see that grammatical gender in languages that have it can be used for language aggression and dehumanization. It doesn't mean that it's the grammatical gender that's the problem. It's that person who is using it this way is the problem. So some of the things that we have been doing, I have been studying slurs and the new slurs that have entered Russian and Ukrainian languages as a result of the ongoing conflict. I have observed that when a new word or an old word is used in a new meaning, sometimes the semantic shift results in a grammatical change, which is really surprising. It was unexpected, and it was surprising to me as a linguist to see when a mass noun that never would take a plural ending, right, would never take a plural suffix, now can be used as a countable noun with plural forms, and the verbs agree with that noun in the plural. So that is some things that I have been observing, and we have seen that languages that have grammatical gender can be, in those languages, gender can be manipulated by speakers to insult their opponents. If you use, let's say, feminine gender describing masculine, describing a male person, and in your culture that is a sign of weakness or not being the proper person, not meeting the social expectations, that can be quite is insulting. The same way female leaders, politicians have been insulted by the usage of masculine grammatical gender while referring to them. So they're shown as abnormal. They're not shown as acting as they're supposed to, right? Being female. Being strong is a problem in this case, right? So people attack strong women, and sometimes the means that they use to do that is usage of the incorrect grammatical gender. Switching to neuter gender in languages where there are three options, right? Masculine, feminine, and neuter. And if with this language, neuter is reserved for non-human entities, using neuter gender toward human is extremely insulting. It's dehumanizing. It brings the person down this great chain of being from the human position down to inanimate objects. And it's very painful, very insulting, very cruel. So these are, I guess, some of the things that I have observed. And well, I'm looking at my notes again from Mariavita's presentation. So I would like to probably finish by saying that it's really an abuse of the concept of freedom of speech to say, I can do whatever I want. I have freedom of speech. I can go and insult people. This is really, really a misuse of a great concept, right? It's misapplication of that. Freedom of speech is not your right to go and insult people or cause distress and suffering for people. That is wrong. I don't know how to get people to understand it. I do my best in my classes, but I guess all of us try to do what we can. But I hope that people would understand that freedom of speech is not for being awful, right, and being a horrible human, and it's not for insulting and hurting other people. It's for making a political statement if necessary, right? But hate should not be protected by freedom of speech. Just my personal opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalia. Thank you very much. I have lots of questions, but I don't know whether I can ask them now. And so I will do my best and wait for the right time after finishing all the presentation. And there are, however, even from this short introduction, very, very interesting and food for thought ideas and issues. And now I'll turn to Angela and asking Angela the very same question. So Angela, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I wanted to say how much I appreciate the previous two interventions, because they sort of, I think we all complement each other in a certain sense. I think, and I wanted to say thanks for Natalia for talking a little bit about the United States context, because this discourse about freedom of speech and how in the United States, it's very hard to talk about hate speech on an institutional level in a certain sense, because we, as a nation, I guess, because of the right to the First Amendment, do not have access to hate speech laws that may exist elsewhere in the world. And also, just like Natalia said also, if there is not that clear and present danger that's existed like on paper since the beginning, I would say like the second century of the 20th century, there's very little that people can do to react officially or in a institutional capacity. Strangely, just to add to that, the FBI does contemplate hate speech as hate speech as a crime, and there's a whole sort of different area of study for that. But it definitely doesn't help us a lot in terms of, you know, analyzing discourse and other things, even though it does exist on an institutional plane. My work, as I think Stefania said in the introduction, and I'm going to try to talk a little bit about multimodal and online hate speech. I work with very small local media, and most of my work up until now has been on Spanish language media in the United States, which in some cases, in terms of certain thoughts, can be classified as ethnic media. In other circumstances, no, and that's most of the time related to geographical constraints. But what I wanted to introduce today in terms of trying to link my area of studies and multimodal discourse to the idea of hate speech is the idea of gatekeeping when we're talking about radio discourse. I have carried out a two-part study on discriminatory speech, let's say, because it's very hard to say what's discriminatory. And I think this is another point that would be very interesting to follow up on. What is discriminatory and what is hate, and where does that blurred line, how can we sort that out, right? And I looked at a Spanish language radio station in the state of Rhode Island, which is the United States' smallest state, and it has a very limited broadcast area. But it also is, this talk show is run by a local personality who is locally famous and has a lot of weight with the local community, with the local Spanish-speaking community. And it's a 50-something-year-old man who does, or did, because I'll get to that later, a daily talk show introducing topics. And the thing about this is that once upon a time, no, radio communities, yes, were virtual because just by the virtue of their being, right? But as we've evolved, like technologically speaking, we have radio shows that are multimodal, right? Because you can phone in, you can type in, you can text in, et cetera, which leaves the radio host with more power in discerning who he's going to give voice to. And I think that's a really important point when most of the topics in the morning show do create very strong in-groups and out-groups, right? So this person, his name is DJ Gato. Gato in Spanish is cat, just in case we have non-Spanish or Italian speakers here. And he is very cat-like, you know, he's very slippery. He knows how to play the audience. He knows who to give more airtime to, et cetera, et cetera. But linking all this back to hate, mainly when we think about radio, right? We have the people he's addressing. We have the people who are overhearing, and we have the people who are hearing because of interest. And the people who he affords the most airtime to are men. He privileges heteronormative discourse, mononormative discourse, and some of the topics explored in this radio show regard cheating, monogamy, swingers, and strangely, single mothers. Now, anyone who stepped out of this ideology that the DJ was trying to propose was either hung up on, not read on air, or attacked, verbally attacked, right? And the thing is, most of the airtime was afforded to these people who did support the DJ's obvious, traditional, quote unquote, when we think about the Latin American community in Rhode Island, I'm not talking at large, who supported that. But there is a sort of silver lining to this research, right? There's a huge pushback from women. The women who managed to either text through WhatsApp and get their text read, even though they were attacked in their absence afterwards by the majority of male callers, or who managed to get some airtime because they were very adamant, did manage to push back against this discriminatory discourse. And I'm just I don't know how much time I've consumed.
But you have some time, yeah.
Okay, great. Because I did want to talk about one of the themes in particular, that this DJ really aimed to keep under control in terms of gatekeeping. His stance on single mothers is that they're very promiscuous. That it's okay to say that they have 3 or 4 children by 3 or 4 different counterparts, males, right? And he would give voice to the people who obviously supported this idea, but the happy ending in sort of this, well, the temporarily happy ending or partial happy ending is that women were really pushing back and saying, no, I'm a single mom. I need to be a good parent. It doesn't matter about my gender. While this was being demonized, right, by most of the callers. So the women overall, I think, were considered an outgroup, just statistically in terms of the time that they were afforded. But I also think that determined categories of women were even another extra outgroup because of their lifestyle. And if they shared that, they were even more ostracized, right? This is the first part of the study. This DJ Gatto, was sent away. He was fired by the radio company. There weren't very many public details as to this, as to what exactly happened, although one could imagine that he went too far at a certain point. But there's no evidence to prove this because it was all very private in terms of the radio station. The sort of second chapter to this research is that the radio station decided that they would no longer have him as a single host, and they decided to hire 4 20-somethings. They decided to hire 4 20-somethings, 2 men, 2 women. And it showed a new level, I think, of awareness in terms of what an audience deems acceptable and what they don't. Because obviously this is all related to the economic sphere and ratings, right? When we think about radio discourse, we're also talking about money and listeners. But the 2 women who are part of the group of 4, did push back further, and were actually challenging their two male counterparts on air when they attempted to repropose the same sort of heteronormative, mononormative discourse that the old DJ Gatto, and they also afforded new airspace to women, and not only the women that fit into the canons, right, of DJ Gatto. So there's a phrase that when I was doing research on local radio really stuck with me, and I think I'm going to close with this. I think in terms of hate, one thing that we have to really be careful of, and this goes back to the other two discourses about technology being online, et cetera, is that a lot of the time, radio specifically can create what the author of this article called, her name is Tseng. It's an article from 2015, fictive bonds of intimacy. And I think this is really important, especially when we're talking about multimodal discourse, in that intimacy can breed a positive community, you know, these bonds of intimacy that are only virtual. But I think also it's very important to keep an eye, because fictive bonds of intimacy, in the case of this radio station, are the ones that propagate hate, right? Or at least discriminatory discourse. So I'm going to end here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Angela, for this very intriguing talk. Well, we sometimes we forget that radio is still exists, and that the radio is a very powerful tool of molding the perspectives, the social perspective of people. And so we will come back later on after giving the floor to Maria Grazia, our last but not least, as I said before, host. I'm just following the alphabetic order. And so Maria Grazia, your turn now.
Thank you, Stefania. First, I'd like to say that I enjoyed very much all the presentations, and thanks, Stefania, for your question that I'll try to answer by touching on 4 distinct areas. I'm lucky because I'm the last one, so I had the time to think of everything you said. So first, I think that it's important to define research questions. So our idea of research questions, that how research questions connect to method, and then I'll give you my own definition of multimodality. That is my main area of interest. And then I'll try to explain why multimodality will be increasingly useful to artificial intelligence models. So I'll be very general, but I'll tell you right away that I'm currently working on women's self-hate. That is when hate becomes so ingrained in our life worlds that it becomes self-directed and implicit, as Natalia was saying. So I'm trying to understand how to reduce gender bias in data sets built for machine learning systems that feed artificial intelligence vocal assistants, such as, for example, Alexa. And these systems basically project an image of a subservient young female, a kind of a secretary, and somehow encourage and disseminate forms of inbuilt bias that is all the more complex, of course, to resist and to contrast. So first, speaking of research questions, we are all very familiar with research questions, but we have been taught that these should be extremely focused, to the point, very specific. So unspecific, vague, general research questions are generally seen as bad research questions. And everyone with experience reviewing papers knows this very well. But here, my point is a bit different, because what I define as a surface research question should be actually designed, as we all know, as we have been trained to do. But we, I think, should first engage with our own deep research question. at a personal level, at a kernel level. So research questions, and this is, thank you, Stefania, because your question was very important for me to develop this kind of thought. So these deep research questions should work somehow as a compass to navigate the complexities of communicative phenomena and to keep us somehow on track on a basic research question that is, for me, at least for me, is how can I make my research relevant to me, to my life, and how can I make a difference, even a small difference, doesn't matter, but how can I make a difference with what I do? So I think that the personal level should be always aligned as closely as we can with the professional, with the intellectual level. And I would say that the cost of somehow losing this alignment would be a loss of personal authenticity. I think this is very, very important for what we are discussing today. So in other words, answering these research questions, especially those at the kernel level, brings us to the question of methods. So then again, the choice of method should be aligned with what we think is important for us and for our lives to understand. So I'll be perhaps oversimplifying here. Apologies if I'm being too banal, but I see that we have two overarching sets of methods in linguistics, that is qualitative and quantitative, with the qualitative being insightful, of course, fine-grained, but problematic in terms of limited sampling and high degree of confirmation bias. Many forms of bias that I see are somehow problematic in terms of this method, these sets of methodologies, and quantitative. But the problem here that the quantitative, in my opinion, is currently mostly focused on language alone data and excluding other semiotic resources that contribute and determine, influence meaning making. So these two very different and largely contrasting sets of methods have been combined by many of us, but I'm afraid not always convincingly. And I'll give you an example here. In multimodal corpus studies approaches, I think that they are still struggling with the problem of treating data as embedded semiotic systems rather than separate clusters of differently combined forms of semiosis. So, since quantitative methods are mostly based on monomodal, language-based data sets, analysis, in my opinion, will be automatically skewed, as communication cannot be explained or unpacked by a language alone approaches. We all know that communication goes well beyond language, and we all have experience of these when we think of the most basic and universal forms of communication, that is talk. So we communicate with words, we communicate with silence, with voice, with tone, with many other conversational cues, with our eyes, for example, with distance from the other participants, with movements and so on. So any example of communication in the present and in the past is multimodal, as my friend Anthony Baldry would say. So multimodality is a discipline that considers this multiplicity of semiotic resources that circulates in human communication. And I believe that multimodality will be at the forefront to overcome the current binary systems that inform artificial intelligence models. And here I refer to artificial intelligence models for conversation. That is the reason why I mentioned conversation, because this is somehow significant and relevant to what I'm trying to do. So you or we can think that artificial intelligence is still distant somehow from our lives, but more and more institutions make decisions based on artificial intelligence systems using machine learning. So where algorithms take and learn from big data to find patterns mostly but not exclusively linguistic patterns and therefore make predictions. So these systems inform how much credit banks give different clients, who the healthcare systems prioritizes for treatments, which applicants companies call in for job interviews. So gender bias are ingrained in these systems and impact on women's lives and health, psychologically, financially, for example, and at a global level. So the problem here is that artificial intelligence systematically increases gender, ethnic, religious, sexual stereotypes and prejudice. So if you wonder why AI systems are biased, the easy answer here is because they are human-made. Team developers who make decisions informing AI systems shape them. First, we may consider gender gap. Just to give you an idea, not more than 20% of AI professionals are women, and women are more likely to have low status jobs in data science fields, for example. And at a more granular level, humans generate, collect, label the data that goes into data sets, and then humans decide what data sets, variables, and rules the algorithm learn from to make predictions. And the important thing here is that both of these phases introduce biases in AI systems. So this is what I call inbuilt bias, what comes before anything that we understand about machine learning and human machine interaction. So we may call these inbuilt or embedded biases. And another interesting bit, at least in my opinion, is that data points are snapshots of the world we live in. So they reproduce injustice, prejudice, they are unequal because the world we live in is unequal. So I think that multimodality can significantly assist machine learning systems design to promote gender smart artificial intelligence to advance gender equity rather than embed scale downstream gender bias. And I think that multimodal analysts should be involved in the process of defining the software, not so much the software architecture and infrastructure, but more within the algorithm and data for machine learning systems. So far, the tutorial approach has been successful in getting models off the ground, but some crucial questions are still there, mostly in terms of how the complexity of several semiotic systems can be brought into machine learning design and how data sets design can be made more inclusive. So very, very quickly to just finish off with my random thoughts. One recent UNESCO report explained that the artificial intelligence vocal assistant's passivity to gender abuse is still pervasive, is still coded into AI vocal assistants that have been mainstreamed as exclusively female or female by default, both in name and voice, such as Amazon's Alexa, Apple's Siri, Microsoft's Cortana. So this report, I think this is interesting.
Questo potrebbe rispondere alla tua domanda. È ancora vivo.
Yes.
Attualmente ha 63 anni.
Yes, this is, this is how Alexa is ingrained in our life world. This is a living example of that. So what I was saying, that this report was titled, "I'd Blush If I Could." That was the standard response any user got if addressing a series as a bitch. So my surface research question here is, how can we reduce AI inbuilt bias? So even though AI technologies have acquired very advanced human-like communication skills, gender biases are still pervasive. They project an image of an obliging, secretary-like young lady that fits Western men's fantasies and at the same time perpetuates patriarchal ideologies. So multimodal approaches can help introducing diversity in datasets by overriding these binary AI models. Apologies, I talked too much.
No, it's absolutely fine. Thank you, Maria Grazia, for this intriguing and interesting talk. Sorry, I hear an echo in my. Okay, that's fine. So I would like just to collect some of the main ideas that have emerged from these wonderful talks. First of all, we need a definition of hate speech. What is hate speech? What is hate? And what is hate speech? And apparently, there is a sort of legal definition. What there might be, we hope there is a legal definition of or an institution, a legal definition of hate speech and an institutional response. But as Natalia said, there is a common layman. Let me use this term. Feedback to hate speech in such a way as if we eliminate the taboo words or the words that carries with itself in its connotation hate, the problem doesn't exist any longer. So we have solved everything. In Italy, we have a different situation whereby the topic about hate issue is non-relevant per se, because there are much more important problems and issues to solve before taking into consideration hate speech. And this is, in my opinion, incredibly wrong and biased, because language is a linguistic behavior. First of all, it's a behavior. So we behave in a certain way because we have been grown up in a certain way in a certain culture, and in order to represent the values or the beliefs that we have, which may be a stereotypical one, we use language. As Angela has revealed in her study about the Gatto DJ at the program, where the pattern was that of creating outgroups, and outgroups were those who have been always discriminated, and in particular, in the case she represented women. And even though the DJ was made redundant and other DJs arrived for DJs to represent probably 4 different viewpoints, the same pattern was re-established so as to represent the fact that these stereotypes are snapshots, as Maria Grazia said, of the world we live in, because we are the stereotypes in a sort of way, or we live in a stereotypical representation of reality, and we take it for granted to such an extent that we don't have any problem at all if we have Alexa, Siri, or Cortana, women, secretaries for Western men in a patriarchal representation. But at the same time, if we become aware of this and we start saying that this is a problem, then we are sort of bullied by other people because verbally, at least, through hate speech, because we limit their freedom of speech. So this is, from the linguistic perspective, fascinating, but from a social perspective, devastating. So what, I'm just asking out of curiosity, what, picking up again some of the main issues Maria Grazia explained. What are the how I try to reformulate the question. We as linguists have the duty of, let me say, use this word, duty of analyzing language, the language of hate speech, but what can we do as linguists to help common people to understand what is hate speech, and what is discrimination? Some people don't think they are discriminating other people. They think that this is reality, this is life. Inequality in the world, it's just a matter of fact. So why do we bother to contrast discrimination? So what can be our contribution in society to contrast, to help people understand more about hate speech and why they shouldn't use hate speech? I don't know, just a question, it's come up to my mind.
This is a very big question.
Yeah, that's a philosophical question. Where
yes,
are we going?
Yeah, Stefania, this is very challenging as a question. If I just may add something more, I think that what is very important that we as linguists understand or try to figure out which ways, which direction we can take to have an impact in society. So I think that is important that we start trying to overcome these disciplinary boundaries and start thinking about going beyond the mere descriptive. Because my feeling is that when I read research in like linguistics, we are very, very much connected to descriptions. We describe phenomena. This is what we've been trained to do. And somehow we feel wary about applications. There's a lot of reluctance I see in, like these intellectual circles when we talk about the applicative part of what we do. But I think, I don't know if you agree with me, but these descriptions, theoretical ways of addressing social problems or communicative phenomena.
The message of an utterance, right? So the message of the utterance that may or may not be the sum of the individual words in the utterance. It seems to me that the public too often believes that if there is no word kill, then it's not hate speech. I collected a corpus of comments. We mentioned comments after journalistic pieces online about Trump's comments about ultraviolet light and cleaners to cure COVID. There were huge debates. He didn't say use bleach to cure COVID. Yes, he did. No, he didn't say so. Yes, he did. Well, he didn't use this particular word. Well, to any reasonable person, a native speaker of English, it is clear that he wanted doctors to treat patients, to check whether or not it's possible to treat patients with who have COVID with bleach and ultraviolet light. However, it seems to me that this concept that our utterances are actually speech acts. Mm-hmm. So, for example, somebody uses ambiguous words, right, or code words, or dog whistles, right? But you and I and any other person who is familiar with social context, right, socio-political context of this message, they can see that it's a hateful, aggressive, dehumanizing comment. But there is no slurs, there are no taboo words, there are no insulting words. or so-called fighting words. And I wonder if it would be possible to kind of transmit this information that messages are speech acts. So maybe if we have something like 87 people here in this meeting, if everyone volunteers at the local high school to give a 30-minute lecture and explain what a speech act is, would we be able to do a little bit good for this world, you know?
Yeah, that's correct. And yeah, the other thing is, okay, so the message has a perlocutionary force. It's a pragmatic act, which is not conveyed simply by words, but because words go beyond the literal meaning. There are the implicatures which you or the inferences you can make when listening. The problem is that some people, when people actually speak or use hate speech, then and we come back to what we was said in the previous session, they justify their talk as, okay, I didn't mean that literally, or I didn't, that was not what I meant, because words are ambiguous. So this is quite difficult, and sometimes there is also the these sort of gatekeeping, more time or more possibilities are offered to people who are thought to be the in-group of that society rather than to the out-groups. And so they never have the possibility of replying, or if they try to do that, they are sort of bullied verbally by all the other people in the in-group. And so there is no perception of the fact that in-groups, out-groups are simply a different type of people who are not better or worse one the other. They have different characteristics, and which are simply different, not better or worse, as I was saying. And this is yes, one of the problem, I think, one of the issues. And if the institutions, well, I have this perception that the institutions sometimes highlight the problem, and then they do not offer any solution. They say, okay, this is a problem, and it's up to you to the public, to the population, solve it. This don't do that, but they never say how people are supposed not to do that or not to say that, because that's up to the personal curiosity or personal attitude towards one thing or the other. Yes, so this is really a very huge issue. How we describe, we may go beyond, we may see we may have some ideas as to how contrast hate speech as this one, going in schools and speak about this. Do school accept our self-invitation? And then sometimes I have the idea that we might be perceived as self-referential with our studies, and whereas we may do something for society. I do not know whether there are questions from the audience. I can't see the chat box as. Oh yes, I do have. So let me see how I can manage to. There are some. Okay, Amelia, I need your help. Can you please help me and see whether there are people? I see yes. Judita has raised her hand. Okay, and then I saw somebody else.
Catherine.
Oh, they disappeared. Okay, I don't know who is the first. Judita, maybe?
Yes, Judita is the first.
Okay, well, thank you all. First of all, I'd like to say hello to everyone. It's good to be here, and I'd like to congratulate the I-LanD team for this initiative. Thank you so much for your talks to the speakers. I just wanted to just jump back the idea of doing something concrete. I didn't have the opportunity of saying something last time, so it's the first session. But I have the privilege to work with a group of colleagues here at the University of Lille on a very interesting project on the language of manipulation and misinformation. What they're doing, so they're not specifically working on hate speech just yet. But these colleagues have the idea, and I'm collaborating effectively, of training teachers at schools. So basically working with school teachers in Italy, in Rome, and in France, in the north of France, to add the notions of linguistics to a program catering for high school students, and basically raising awareness about how certain linguistic notions can be used as indicators, as warning signs, and as I said, evidence of when the language is being misused for manipulation purposes. So the idea is to give these teachers some tools to teach the students how to defend themselves against mechanisms and strategies of misinformation. So this is the Educazione Civica in Italy. And the coordinator of the project is a colleague in general linguistics. Her name is Paola Pietrandrea. So they're working with Roma 3, with a colleague everybody knows is Edoardo Lombardi Vallauri. He's a great popularizing, is very much into the popularizing field. And they have an observatory called in Rome, is an observatory on propaganda and manipulation. And we are setting up an equivalent here in France with his colleagues in general linguistics. I'm the only Anglicist so far, but I'll be very happy to open gates and start collaboration in this respect, because they want to do something very much hands-on. So linguistics is seen as a group, as a resource. So we're teaching the students how to use tools and also identify the traps that are out there, because all our students, all our kids, the younger generations are mainly resourcing themselves via the web nowadays. So that was just a little remark. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Giulietta. What's the other person? Yes.
Catherine.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Yes. Thank you for your extremely interesting talks, and to the organizers for organizing this. I mean, I think from all your talks, I think what we're coming to is, and we can all agree on, is that it's really about how do we identify hate speech. It's really about a relationship between discourse and context, no? Whether it is context of culture or context of situation, and perhaps cross-cultural context. It may change, no? So we may look into that. And as Natalia was saying, how do we detect implicit hate, for instance? Or also Maria Grazia was, looking into ideology, I think, in a way, was underlying what you were saying about feeding, AI, and the consequence of what you were saying was quite dire to me, because it means ideology as a basic concept in critical discourse analysis, at least, is that it is something so invisible and so ingrained in society, is that it's then normative, no? So if we are the people feeding AI, I don't think I don't know how we can really intervene and you know, on that. If the basic of it is, you know, ideology and also vernacular violence, as Angela was saying, in the radio, you know, is a way of, you know, the radio is voicing, you know, the vernacular, you know, the everyday violence. No? So, I mean, I guess my question, I mean, I was really intrigued by all of your suggestions. I was maybe interested in what Maria Grazia is thinking about in terms of multimodal analysis and how it can help. I was actually thinking also about, for instance, memes and social media. And I mean, if you could expand on that, or maybe you're not thinking about that. But, you know, because obviously, if you know, it's, they are obviously, you know, meaning made out of different modes. So I'm thinking whether you're thinking about this. How can we detect that kind of hate speech? How can we actually study it? If, yeah, sorry, that's my question. I guess.
So I think there are two questions for me, right? So the first is how can we build more inclusive data sets, and if it's so, how can we make them more inclusive? I think that there's a lot that can be done. There are many projects, for example, a project called Empathic Design, and there's another one that is called Inclusive AI. It's not that difficult, actually, because at the moment, what we have is drawing mostly data sets, I mean, in terms of vocal assistant models that are drawn on exclusively white 30-something males, you know, like having kind of information, socio-demographic information and linguistic inputs from only one specific target, that is a Western male 30-something and white. So a practical way of building more inclusive data sets would be to incorporate different forms of voice input, vocal and linguistic inputs into data sets. And this is something that has been currently developing at a global level, mostly in the US. And in for your second question, Catherine, I don't know if I understood well. So basically you were interested in understanding how we can automatically analyze text and image relations. Was this your question?
If you are currently working on this, you know, on, for instance, memes and other
kind of things. I've started working on controversial matching of text and image. That is when text contradicts the image, such as in the case of memes, but I've done this mostly in qualitative terms. So analyzing these using a multimodal archive from a multimodal critical discourse analysis perspective. But then I have two wonderful researchers working with me. I don't know if they're here, I hope so. Chiara Pogli and Serena Santonocito, who are currently working on the AI model, trying to understand how somehow pragmatic inference can be transferred in AI models, because at the moment a serious limit of AI and machine learning systems informing AI models is that these basically don't understand when there's a contradiction in one unique multimodal text. So here, what you need is the human brain to understand the message. For example, a hateful message when you have something conveyed by the text and something completely different conveyed by the image. So to understand the interplay, the multimodal interplays, there's a lot that needs still to be done. because this is something that is currently not available in machine learning systems that are traditionally monomodal, language-based.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I think Sergio was there queuing. Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, sure.
Perfect. Good evening, and thank you all. Very inspiring talks, all of you. And thank you to Giuditta, who strongly suggested training for Italian teachers, because before and after a PhD in English in Texas, I have worked as a high school teacher. And as the American-based colleagues know, I think you were obliged to go over sexual harassment training, and I learned a lot, and that was important. Even though it was online, I learned a lot. And the multimodality thing also in real time, real life is so important. The elevator eyes are something that is today considered a sexual harassment or some sort of problem. And my idea is that maybe also for hate speech, both from a theoretical point of view and a procedural, institutional point of view, we should follow the same line for sexual harassment, because at the very beginning, when the debate started about that, they thought that sexual harassment was rape. You had to rape a woman to be accused of sexual harassment. And this is not the case. And the same thing is for hate speech. And I learned a lot, and I am living evidence of that, because when coming back from the United States and going back to school, in one visit to one event, I was with my students, and there was a girl who was guiding us through the event. And one student said something along the lines, "Hey, what do they do here? Do they only hire cute girls?" I looked at him and I said, "No, they hire people who are competent, who are skilled to carry out the job." But I admit, I must confess, I would have never thought of that exchange as something that was, because as a matter surface level, it is a compliment, correct? But it was not exactly appropriate to address a woman. And so definitely, I think that we all need the training. And Giuditta is perfectly right. And it is something that also teachers must become aware of. Thank you again.
I don't think there are comments about Sergio's feedback, but thank you very much, Sergio. And I don't know whether Giuditta, yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Stefania. Just quickly say that what Natalia was mentioning before, so the grammar of hate, this is key, this is central. And also getting back to Maria Grazia, when she mentioned the multimodal aspect. So this is actually quite doable and feasible right now, also within this project and so many other projects. For the moment, they're working on implicit meaning, speech acts as well. And maybe we could already suggest some modules on multimodality, which is not contemplated at all. So what Maria Grazia was saying was actually quite inspiring in relation to what is being done already. So thank you. That's just a little remark. Thanks.
Thank you. I don't know whether there are, following this feedback from the audience, whether our host wants to add something more to what they have already said. I mean, I took a lot of notes. Coming back to Mariavita, you said at the beginning of your talk that hate speech needs to be institutionalized, to be legislated, and that there are differences between the legislation in the US and the legislation in the European Union, which I think that this goes beyond the fact that in one country we have a civil law system and the other country we have a common law system. As you concentrated particularly on Irish English, have you noticed, I don't know whether you have carried out any research across cultures, Irish and Italy, or Irish and Irish English hate speech and Italian hate speech, or American hate speech, and whether you have found any particular issues.
Right. Okay. No, I haven't carried out, anything specific on Irish English, which is per se quite controversial also nowadays in terms of variety and how is it used, especially in online communities. What kind of, Irish English markers can be more recognized as typically Irish English, or more sort of global English, American English, and so on. But some issue that really come across about being peculiar of some aspect is the thing I was referring to about communities. For instance, something that emerged both in the report that the Ministry of Justice carried out and also in the comments is this issue about some communities, such as the one of travelers in Ireland. How are they defined? How can they be preserved from hate speech crimes? And this is particularly true of Ireland because it's a relatively kind of new phenomenon, being Irish people discriminating other people because they have a long, tradition of being discriminated against in the history, and their also relation with the empire, with Ireland, in the US, the stereotypical Irish stageman. So, and this emerged quite clearly in the questionnaire that the Ministry of Justice carried out among people, because many people in Ireland were like, is there an issue such as hate speech? We are not racist as a population, whereas as a matter of fact, you can find traits and communities that have been the object of hate speech for, I'm saying not century, but at least decades. And in this, for instance, travelers, since, times, they were the object of this in terms of also the use of Irish English as a marker of a rough and type of English variety and usage. So not only the category, but also the language used by that community. And I don't know if this answers your question, but specifically on Irish English, because it's very, especially when you're carrying out things with online communities, there is the issue of identity and recognizing the variety and identity is very slippery in that.
Thank you, Mariavita. I saw that Giuseppe has a question, and then I would like to come back. Yep.
Yeah, I was actually catching up with what Mariavita was saying. First of all, thank you very much for this brilliant seminar today. I've learned so much from so many different perspectives. But going back to the Irish travelers, actually close to my heart, so I need to mention them. There's a lot of discrimination and racism against the community, of course. Like there's discrimination and racism against all small communities. So one of those, the Irish travelers, are gaining now visibility because of weird and we go back to Maria Grazia here, weird, let's say, TV series which try to represent them in weird situation. So you see them like the poorest gypsy enjoying life, doing weird things, like getting married, for instance, and organizing weird party. I don't really understand what's the meaning, and especially what is actually the real core meaning behind all this, because a way trying to represent a stereotypical way, in a stereotypical way, the way these communities who have their own lives, which is quite difficult for us to understand because we don't belong to them, in such a, let's say, direct way, tend to make the phenomenon even larger, even bigger. And this has always happened also, and it also applies to other communities. Not every time just trying to stereotypically representing them in a way which is not true, in a way. Instead of doing them a favor and just, help them gaining visibility, you're just trying to make the whole thing even worse. What do you think? I don't know if you're actually familiar with those TV series, which is quite weird, no? Irish travelers get married and stuff like this. There are so many.
Yeah, I am. Yeah, and yeah, I'm familiar with that. And it's there is it looks like there are some kind of stereotypical images of Irishness, of whiteness, because this is also something that is recurring in the community of travelers. That in a way, I'm not sure how much this is helping. Kind of having less discrimination against this stereotyping representation of it. It's very complicated, and it's very I don't know. It also puts the question of being in group and out group in that. How they represent themselves, how they're seen from the others. How can some words be used? And this goes back to what Natalia was saying. How do you represent in terms of your own identity? And I'm sure that in each different context, you may find similar situation. Even if this one of the Irish travelers, I would say it's pretty typical of I-LanD. It's pretty unique, being gypsies, but at the same time, the same ethnicity as well, the same skin color, at the same time living at the margins for so many years, having special legislation about for years. So, yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure how much that helps. Giuseppe, not sure. I don't.
It doesn't help at all. That's
no.
Right.
It goes back to the same idea of representing and stereotyping, which probably is one of the issues at a core of language, how much we use the language without even being aware of how much we are representing and stereotyping the other. So
that's right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I would like to go back to Natalia with her grammar of hate speech. I'm quite interested in it, and I would like to ask you whether you observed some changes in the textual part, in the syntactical and textual pattern, apart from the grammatical or morphological ones. When representing, when you said that when a word change has a semantic shift, the grammar changes as well. So, yeah.
I was shocked.
Wow.
I have no words, See, I'm struggling to even find appropriate words for that. So it is to us linguists. It's throughout our training, we get to understand things like transitivity or countability or mass or countable noun or animacy, animate noun and inanimate noun as something that's hardwired in there. So for me to see that novel slurs in Russian and Ukrainian languages are shifting from an inanimate noun, which in Russian and Ukrainian there is a grammatical difference in noun declension. If it's an animate noun, it doesn't get marked in all the cases, but in accusative case, there's a different suffix if it's an animate noun or if it's an inanimate noun. So when the two groups started insulting each other and using old words in a new meaning, those words also, because of the pressure of this contextual surrounding around the word started changing their grammar. I'm just floored by this. So this is coming out this August. If you're interested in it, email me. I'll be happy to share the text. However, the same examples can also be used to demonstrate how difficult it is to analyze and to automatically identify hate speech, because the words that I'm talking about are innocent words, unless you know what's being put into those words by the speakers. So one of the words is cotton, cotton balls or cotton fiber, cotton wool, and that is a collective label for everyone who disagrees with the latest Ukrainian revolution. So if you do not support the changes in the country, then you're not a human. You're just cotton, you're fiber. It's okay to run over you. It's okay to kill you. You don't matter. You're just a thing. You're material. The other one, for people who are like patriotic Ukrainians, is dill, which is the culinary herb, something that's used for cooking. It's not even a human, it's a plant. I mean, when I read this, my hair stands on end. How can people do that? However, computer wouldn't recognize those words because they are just everyday words. So that was a surprising project for me. Like I said, I discovered something I didn't expect to discover.
That's great. That's great. I will certainly write an email to you and have your paper. Yes, I don't know whether there are other questions from the floor. Yes, there is one, but I don't know who's just asking to take part in the conversation.
Hello there.
Okay. Hello.
Can you hear me?
Good evening.
Hi, first of all, I must apologize for my surroundings, as I'm in a parked car in the middle of Trieste, up in the northeast of Italy. I'd like to thank very much the participants for their erudite, eloquent, lucid discussions. I have just a couple of ideas which are running through my mind, which I'd like to share with you. Hesitantly, being a white man with a lot of worry, but maybe for Mariavita it's most interesting. An idea comes to me from the 1980s, when there were the Troubles in Ireland, and there was the head of Sinn Féin was a man called Gerry Adams. And as a child, I never saw his moving image nor heard his voice on English television, because his intentions as the head of Sinn Féin were considered terroristic, hate. He wasn't part of the IRA. He was part of the political wing. At the same time, when there was this censorship of his words and image, which is interesting from a multimodal perspective, even back then they were blocking his image. He was invited and addressed Congress in the US because he was a freedom fighter for the Americans with the Irish lobby there, and so this very much made clear for me at an early age the idea of perspective, which I think another person who talked about this idea of Catherine Russo mentioned this idea of perspective, and also it ties in with Natalia, this idea of intent, and so defining the word as being negative or positive, it doesn't really have that much sense, because it depends on the values of the community which you belong to. Yeah. And so, I mean, as a school child, we used to have this insult. They used to call it, they used to say, "Oh, you're such a donut." Yeah. Okay, a donut is not in itself an offensive word, but said in a certain tone of voice, in a certain context, it was very offensive for us. Yeah, and I just wanted to ask you, I mean, again, it's the idea of what is hate speech and what isn't hate speech, and can it really be defined outside of certain contexts? Are there any universals? I mean, for example, if, the idea, Maria Grazia, I think you're completely correct. But when I hear Siri or Cortina or Alexia, maybe I don't think about some white 30-something male fantasy of oppression and submission, and maybe I just hear a charming, beautiful voice. Yeah. I mean, I think it's a bad example, because it's not by chance that all the voices on these things are women of a certain type. But are there any universals which can help us better approach the problems behind hate speech?
I personally don't know how to answer. I don't know whether the question was for Mariavita or Maria Grazia, or for both of them, or for
no,
all?
It's for general discussion.
General discussion. Okay,
yeah,
everybody.
Because okay. I get, when hate depends on which side you are and how you perspective, which is a value, which is value loaded, and depends on which community you take part in. And so, what was hate as for an English person was freedom for an Irish person in the 1980s, and so, I mean, okay, that's a politically oriented one, so it's very clear on the community, the side. But so that's why it's linked to the idea of universals. What are the universals? Is it more than just man, woman? That because when we start looking to censor in some way, we are actually forcing some value judgments on other people, and I'm not sure if that's a good thing or not. I don't know, and I appreciate the discussion about that.
Yeah. So again, this goes back to the overarching question: what is hate speech? And it depends on the perspective you're looking at hate speech, because, as you said, well, I don't know whether this is correct or not, but as you said, for those people who use the words in an insulting way, some people may use a word in a way which is not perceived as insulting, whereas for other people, the people who receive these words consider that extremely insulting, and it depends on the culture, on the groups we belong to. Well, you said that you were you were called donut when you were a kid. I was called a machinino from my surname, which is something you need to grind the coffee or pepper, and I was extremely angry at the people who called me that way. But they said, okay, it's simply a small thing you use, but I perceive that as extremely insulting to my identity. It's the identity of a person that it is put at risk by when people use certain words. I don't know. I'm sorry. But
I think you're actually going there. I mean, there's hate speech when the context allows hate speech to be there. I mean, there's no such a thing as an insulting word. That word is going to be insulting according to the context, basically. Yeah. So whatever machinino means for you has no meaning for me, basically. Therefore, that way you perceived that sort of, let's say, assault, or if you like, way of addressing you in a way you didn't like was a personal way. So it was your context, was your way. So hate speech has got to do a lot in terms of, you know, being contextualized, I suppose.
Yeah, and it has to do it has to also to do with the tone of voice, with the context, and with, it's not simply a word, it's the whole,
it's all the multimodal landscape which actually portrays them.
Yeah. So I see all our guests have raised their hands. So I don't know who can start first. Maybe Angela?
Angela, yes.
Sure. So I guess when I heard Nicolas's comment, one thing that came to mind was another sort of piece of the puzzle to throw in the pot, which is unconscious bias, and how that leads to hate speech, yes or no, and in what way. And so I kind of wanted to throw it back to Nicolas if he has more comments on that, because I think it's a really important piece of the puzzle in terms of defining hate speech.
Okay, for me, I believe that we all live with unconscious bias. That every position is subjective. There is no objective. Every time through our DNA and through our cultural upbringing, we have a position, and we can't help that. Yeah, I mean, whether you want to frame it in linguistic relativity and the fact that we have, I don't know, gender in language, in some languages, and more genders in some languages and no genders in others, that we perceive gender, or whether the fact that I have a capital I in British, which is the only language with a capital I think, for referring to myself, making me egocentrical, somehow transmits to me through my cultural upbringing of having a perspective in the world which is in conflict with other ones which don't share that same perspective. Now, somehow we have to find a way to maintain ours and cohabit with others and learn others. And like I say, I very much liked is it Natalia's comments about this idea of intent, because it's not about the definition of a word. It's about what's the meaning behind it. The same way that and so yeah, for sure there's unconscious bias. We have to work to change those ideas. Language is one part of it. Language is also a very important part of it. But far more than just lexis. I mean, in the gender, in my department at the moment, we're receiving emails, instead of saying caro, caro, cara, we have car asterisk, yeah, which I completely understand. But so are we going to eliminate gender, or try to eliminate gender in language, in Italian language, in order to readdress the the gender imbalance in society?
No answer.
No, I mean, I think we all agree that we want as a balanced society as possible, with as much opportunity, and also for people, for a meritocracy to be there. Yeah, it was this idea of what is hate speech, and what perspectives, and are there any universals?
Yeah, thank you. Maria Grazia, maybe? I saw that you have raised your hand.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I see what you say, Nick, but I think that it can also be a bit dangerous. because if I agree and I can understand that there are perspectives, intent, ways of perceiving lexical items or ways of addressing each other in groups, out groups, dynamics, but these, so the importance of contextualizing, let's say, utterances of multimodal clusters of any kind of communication does not mean that we shouldn't be perfectly aware of some boundaries. And these boundaries, as Mariavita was saying, are also can also be observed in terms of legislation. Because in my view, these universals are when hate speech is something that prompts violence or incite hatred, or somehow creates the conditions for violence to be somehow developed at any level. So the danger that I see in what you're saying is somehow there is, if we accept language or linguistic relativism per se, then everything should collapse also in terms of the measures of prevention that we should be able to put in place to fight hate when it becomes dangerous for specific groups of people, communities, or even individuals. So I think this is very, very important to bear in mind.
Thank you, Maria Grazia. I think we still have space for Natalia's reply, and then I'm afraid we must close our discussion, but I think we are all happy if you have other questions we can answer by email. So, but please, Natalia, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. The reason I raised the hand is because the thought about, I wanted just to throw in the, remind everybody about the concept of appropriation of slurs. When the question, is there something universal? I dislike very strong statements, but I'm afraid that probably not, because as soon as Hillary Clinton called Trump supporters deplorables, people started wearing t-shirts, proud deplorable, and as soon as Trump called Clinton nasty woman, people were wearing nasty woman, you know, proud nasty woman. The slurs that I'm studying, you know, the cotton and the dill, people are wearing, yes, I'm dill and I'm proud. As soon as there is a slur, people will try to take the power of the insulter away by saying, I'm not going to go with this. You called me this? Fine, I don't care. So that was one of the things that I wanted to say. Another one is that it is possible to strip this nasty word from its power if you use it differently. So, for example, the word gay used to be a nasty slur, very insulting. The society has shifted, whatever, you know, I'm talking about my context, right? So in the United States society, I think the attitude has finally shifted and the word is not as insulting anymore. It's a neutral word. So my question, if I could piggyback to Angela a little bit, did you see appropriation of the words that were used against single mothers, for example, or non-heteronormative people, that people would fight back, again, linguistically, by saying, okay, I don't care that you called me this. I don't see it as an insult. I refuse to see it as an insult.
So it's really interesting that you ask, because of the radio time slot, which is like 9 to 10 a.m., there was a lot of euphemism. Even though it wasn't Spanish, there are still regulations in terms of, like, you know, things you can say at certain times, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of the most controversial words, which had to do with sex acts or things like that, were replaced by noises. Mm-hmm. And that went from whistles, like different types of like whistling with your mouth, to animal noises such as horses what do you call it, naying, etc., etc. And I don't know if that was because the euphemism is part of the taboo and therefore part of the hate speech, or because of the time in which the show was broadcasted. But yeah.
That would be a very good starting point for our next research. I'm really sorry, I'm afraid we have to close here because time has run so fast, and we need to let everybody be free. So thank you very much for being here. I don't know whether Giuseppe wants to say something as a...
Just thank you. Just thank
you.
Emilio. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for
Okay.
this seminar. We can only, let's say, maybe announce our next seminar, which is going to be held on the 10th of March, and is going to be called Quantitative Approaches to Linguistic Analysis. Our lead host will be Marco Venuti, and then you find all the information on our website. Stefania, Angela, Natalia, Maria Grazia, and Maria Vita, thank you very, very much. It was really, really interesting, and we can only have a pleasure with you. Ciao.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, and bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.